Imagine you are walking through a sleeping city and suddenly a lion flashes past you in the darkness, its mane burning like a torch. You would think it is a film or a nightmare. But in Brooklyn, just before dawn in late May of 1911, that scene was real. And the strangest part is this: the tragedy did not begin with a grand explosion or a criminal scheme. It began with something small and almost embarrassing in its ordinariness. A bucket of hot tar, sitting in the dark beneath a ride called Hellgate. One slip, one accidental kick, a few seconds of electrical failure, and a city built to shine like the future began to collapse into flame. That night, Dreamland, the most ornate amusement park on Coney Island, went dark for good. People saw the fire on the horizon like an upside-down sunrise. They heard popping sounds like gunfire as heat set off ammunition inside shooting galleries. They heard the panic in the animal pens, the clang of metal, the roar of trapped bodies. And in another corner, premature babies inside glass incubators were carried out through smoke before history could finish writing the sentence that mattered. Modern medicine sometimes began in places the world dismissed as curiosities. But this story is not only about a fire. It is about how early 20th century America invented mass entertainment, a force that could rescue people from exhaustion and also grind people down. It is about the ambition of a man named William Henry Reynolds, who wanted to build a white city by the sea so crowds could forget their daily weight. It is also about the small lives inside the machine: night workers, nurses, animal handlers, little people living in a tiny town, and silent creatures behind bars. If you stay to the end, you will understand why Dreamland, though gone for more than a century, still burns inside our imagination, in every modern theme park gate, in every roller coaster that lifts us toward the sky, and in every moment we believe light can defeat darkness. So let us begin where the fire was born. Chapter 1. The Bucket of Hot Tar Under Hellgate. Some names are built to make you shiver. Hellgate was one of them. At Dreamland, the entrance to Hellgate was designed like a warning. You were about to descend into the underworld. A large red devil figure waited near the front. Visitors bought a ticket, stepped into a boat, and drifted into darkness through fake caves and scenes made from plaster, wood, cloth, and light. The ride did not take you anywhere. Its purpose was simple: frighten you, then make you laugh, then make you tell someone else that they had to try it. That was daytime. But on the night of May 26th, 1911, after midnight, Dreamland was closed. The crowd was gone, music faded, the wide paths felt too large for the few people left behind. Yet the park did not fully sleep. The next day would lead into the Memorial Day holiday, one of the biggest crowd periods of the year. Before a weekend like that, everything had to run smoothly. No leaks, no breakdowns, no embarrassment. So a crew climbed above Hellgate to patch a leak. They brought a common building material of the era, tar heated until it could be used to seal gaps against water. It sat in a bucket in a tight space, with temporary bulbs hung to provide light. Then the problem began with a phrase that sounds gentle until you live inside it. An electrical short. The bulbs flickered. In a blink, they popped and shattered. Glass fell. The passage plunged into blackness. Picture it. You are working high above a ride structure. Your hands are sticky with tar, the smell is sharp, sweat mixes with salt air, and suddenly the only light disappears. A space that was already cramped becomes a sealed box of darkness. In that darkness, someone slipped. An accidental kick or a misstep struck the bucket. Hot tar spilled onto wood, and a truth everyone knows but no one wants to face returned with teeth. Wood plus hot tar plus dry material equals fire. Flame rose. In the first moments, a cruel question appears. Do you run for help, or do you try to smother it yourself? The supervisor chose to fight it first. Maybe he believed he could. Maybe he feared blame. Maybe he thought it was only a small fire. But in an amusement park built like a stage set, where stone was often only plaster on wood, a small fire is a dangerous illusion. Dreamland was built to look like a palace. Its bones were fragile, like theater. And theater, when flame finds it, burns the way it was always meant to burn. Within minutes, fire climbed framing and licked paint and fabric and dry boards. A watchman reached the alarm. The signal went out. Feet ran. Doors opened. Shouts carried into the night. But by the time firefighters were moving toward the shore, the blaze had already crossed the line between a repair accident and a feeding thing. It was hungry. In many disasters, the most important moment happens in the first minutes, when the event can still be stopped. Dreamland slipped away during that window. To understand how one kicked bucket could kill an entire park, we have to understand how those parks were built. This was an era of speed. Build fast, make it look grand, open on schedule, repair later. But later always fought with opening dates and peak weekends and competition. Hellgate, like many attractions, was built by the logic of stagecraft. A dramatic exterior, a hidden skeleton of wood, wiring, and scenery. It did not need to last 50 years. It needed to feel real for 5 minutes while the visitor passed through. Electricity, the very thing that made Dreamland famous, also carried new weaknesses. Wiring standards were not what they are today. Temporary work lights, connections, and overloaded circuits could fail. One failure brings darkness. And in darkness, people become clumsy. They cannot see the edge of a platform. They cannot see where the bucket sits. They reach for something, shift their weight, step wrong. The human body reacts fast, and sometimes the reaction is the mistake. Tar matters here. Tar was used widely for waterproofing because it was cheap and effective. But when hot tar spills, it spreads heat and sticks to surfaces. It clings to wood and cloth and paint, turning them into fuel. If you try to wipe it or stomp it without the right method, you smear it wider. In a confined area, it can behave like a burning glue. And Hellgate was a tunnel. Tunnels trap heat and smoke. They also create channels of air that can feed flame. Amusement structures often included hidden voids above ceilings, gaps for machinery, cavities behind plaster. In fire, those voids become corridors. Flame travels unseen until it erupts somewhere else. So a fire can appear to jump, even when it is simply following the architecture that was designed to hide mechanics from visitors. There is one more human detail that history repeats. In the first minutes of many disasters, people choose pride over speed. They try to fix the problem quietly before calling help, because calling help admits failure. It feels responsible. It feels controlled. But fire grows while control hesitates. A decision made to avoid embarrassment can become the seed of catastrophe. Now the fire was loose, and it was moving through a city that had been built from scenery. Pause for a moment on that first darkness, because it is more than a detail, it is the hinge of the whole night. In a modern city, we treat darkness as an inconvenience. In 1911, especially inside a narrow passage of wood and plaster, darkness could become a trap. You lose depth and distance. You cannot see where your foot is going. You cannot tell whether the sound you hear is a coworker or the crackle of flame. And when you are holding or standing near something as dangerous as hot tar, darkness turns a routine task into a gamble. There is also the quiet presence of fatigue. Night repair work was common because parks needed to look perfect when gates opened. A crew working after midnight is a crew whose body is already asking to stop. Fatigue narrows attention. It slows reaction time. It increases the chance of a small mistake, not because people are careless, but because human limits are real. Many disasters begin this way, with ordinary work performed under extraordinary pressure. And pressure was everywhere. Memorial Day weekend meant money. It meant proof that a season would succeed. It meant managers demanding speed and workers trying to meet deadlines. In that environment, a delay feels like failure, and failure feels expensive. So when the first flame appeared, the instinct was to handle it quietly, to fix it before anyone noticed. That instinct is understandable. It is also deadly. When you listen to this story, do not picture a single spark as the villain. Picture a whole system built to move fast, to impress, and to reopen on time. That system created the moment when one kicked bucket could become a fire that outran human decision. Chapter 2. When water became weak, a war lost in minutes. By around 2 in the morning, the fire was no longer only in Hellgate. It was spreading across Dreamland, a park that covered roughly 10 acres of dense structures. The Atlantic sea breeze threaded through paths and pushed the blaze as if the wind itself had learned to hunt. Buildings stood close together to make it easy for visitors to walk and spend. In a fire, closeness becomes a bridge. And because Dreamland was designed to be dazzling, it carried everywhere what fire loves: decoration. People imagine fires as roaring wood and collapsing walls. Dreamland had an additional sound that made the night feel like violence: gunfire. In shooting galleries, target games stored large quantities of ammunition. Under extreme heat, cartridges can pop and explode, not as a controlled volley, but like a storm of metallic snaps. That sound spread fear beyond the visible flames. If you hear gunfire in darkness, your mind invents dangers that are not there, and panic multiplies. But the thing that truly broke hope was water. Coney Island understood the risk of fire. It had hydrants, mains, and a system meant to provide pressure. On paper, firefighters should have been able to throw strong streams onto roofs and towers. The first crews arrived and did what they were trained to do. They stretched hose, they opened valves, they aimed for the heart of the blaze. At first, water reached. Then it weakened. Pressure fell. Streams sagged and dropped short, turning from weapons into drizzle. Against a fire fed by wood, paint, cloth, and tar, a weak stream is a cruel joke. Why did pressure drop? The reason is painfully human. Nearby businesses and residents feared the fire would leap to their own buildings, so they opened their own lines to protect themselves. When everyone pulls from a shared supply at once, no one receives enough. In disaster history, this is a common trap. Self-protection can drain the collective lifeline. News of the blaze spread fast. More companies rushed in from across Brooklyn. Fireboats were brought to pump water from the sea. Yet by the time enough support arrived, Dreamland had become a furnace that lit itself. The firefight shifted from saving Dreamland to saving the rest of Coney Island. Containment became the goal. This was also the moment the disaster gained an audience. People woke and came to watch. Some wore coats thrown over night clothes. Some brought children. Some stood silent. Some cried. Humans are both terrified by fire and drawn to it. Part of us wants to flee. Another part wants to witness the end, as if watching long enough could prove we are safe. While the crowd watched, there were lives inside the park that could not move easily. In animal cages, metal began to heat. Animals smelled smoke before people did. They growled and slammed bars. And somewhere among them was a young lion with a dark mane, Black Prince. Within hours, his name would become a symbol of the boundary breaking. Firefighters that night were brave. But bravery cannot always defeat physics. A city system can fail when fear overwhelms coordination. The Dreamland water story is a lesson in collective behavior. The system assumed people would cooperate. The moment fear arrived, cooperation cracked. And the result was simple. Dreamland could not be saved. Now, to understand why people built a city so vulnerable, we have to meet the man who wanted it more than anyone. To appreciate why the fire spread so quickly, think of Dreamland as a dense city of scenery with narrow service corridors. Parks were designed to guide crowds, and crowd guidance requires close placement. If an attraction is too far from the next, visitors stop spending and start leaving. So the buildings leaned toward each other. Rooflines met. Decorative bridges connected spaces. Backstage passages carried wires and pipes through hidden cavities. Those cavities are invisible during normal operations. In a fire, they become highways. Fire also behaves differently at the shore. A sea breeze can shift direction, and when it shifts, a wall of flame can lean and surge. Heat rising from the blaze pulls air inward like a living breath. That creates its own wind. So there is the natural wind and the fire's wind working together. Sparks lift and drift. Where they land, they can start new ignitions. A park filled with painted scenery gives sparks countless opportunities. Now return to the water problem, because it is one of the most haunting parts of the night. A hydrant system is not only pipes and valves. It is social trust. It depends on everyone believing that the shared defense must be protected. But fear makes people protective, not cooperative. When neighbors opened their own lines, they were not trying to sabotage firefighters. They were trying to save their homes. Yet the combined effect was the same. The system weakened at the moment it was most needed. This is why Dreamland is remembered as more than a local fire. It is an early lesson in how modern systems can fail under mass demand. The same pattern appears later in other disasters, where power grids, water networks, and communications collapse when everyone needs them at once. Dreamland was an amusement story, but its mechanics were a city story. Chapter 3. The Boy Who Paid His Father's Debts, and the Dream of Becoming Senator. Before Dreamland burned, before the bulbs and domes and crowds, There was a boy in Brooklyn learning an early lesson. You can work hard and still lose everything if you do not understand the rules of money. William Henry Reynolds was born on February 29, 1868. A leap day, a date that appears only every 4 years. Some later joked that perhaps this is why he lived as if he needed to compress time, always moving fast, always building, always chasing the next step. His father was a carpenter. Honest work, but not always safe against debt. When financial trouble came, creditors came too. Young William did not choose to hide. He chose to negotiate. He learned to speak with adults, to ask for reduced interest, to bargain for discounts if paid early. He paid debts and kept small margins. It was a harsh kind of education, but it taught a key truth. Money can come not only from labor, but from understanding psychology and structure. By 18, he opened a real estate office. Brooklyn was growing. Workers needed housing. Investors wanted property. Reynolds placed himself between them and moved faster than others. He bought land, built rows of homes, sold in batches, reinvested. Profit arrived early, and with profit came confidence, a confidence that can turn into appetite. He entered politics. Still young, he became a state senator. The seat mattered, but the title mattered more. From then on, many called him Senator Reynolds, and he used it like a seal. In a society where status opens doors, that title helped him meet investors, negotiate deals, and persuade people that he was not merely selling buildings. He was building the future. Early 20th century America had a new addiction: modernity. Electric light, steel, transit, advertising, urban growth. Coney Island became a place where modernity was packaged into a single evening. You could ride a train to the sea, step into a gate, and for a few hours believe you had entered tomorrow. Reynolds saw that and recognized something deeper than entertainment. He saw emotional real estate, land that earned money not by sheltering people, but by thrilling them, by giving them escape. A house is a product. So is a night of wonder. And a night of wonder, sold correctly, could return profit with astonishing speed. So he decided to play a bigger game. He would build an amusement park that would force people to say, "I have never seen anything like that." He would call it Dreamland. Reynolds was not a ride inventor. He was an organizer of desire. He measured the world in land and crowds. He understood that if you can direct the flow of people, you can direct the flow of money. And if you can direct money, you can shape a city. Yet the same hunger that builds greatness can also build fragility. Because when your product is wonder, you are pushed to promise more each season, and promises become pressure. Reynolds' rise also reflects a wider moment in New York history. Brooklyn was expanding, and real estate was both fortune and battlefield. Transit lines created new neighborhoods almost overnight. If you owned land near a new route, you could become wealthy quickly. So the city rewarded those who moved early and acted decisively. Reynolds learned to read that map of opportunity, and he learned another lesson as well. Public perception could be shaped. Politics helped him with that. A public title is a form of marketing. It signals legitimacy, connections, and influence. For investors deciding where to place money, legitimacy matters as much as the plan itself. Reynolds used the era the way the era allowed ambitious men to use it. He built alliances. He built confidence. He built a personal brand that suggested success was inevitable. But inevitability is the most dangerous feeling in business. When you believe a plan must succeed, you stop hearing warnings. Amusement parks were full of warnings. Small fires were common along the shore. Wood and canvas and paint do not like open flame. Electrical systems were still young. Safety codes were inconsistent. Yet the profits of a good summer were so large that risk often felt acceptable. Reynolds was not alone in this logic, but he embodied it. He turned escape into property. And property, once it starts returning money, demands to be fed with more development. Dreamland was his largest expression of that belief. Build something so striking that crowds feel they must see it. Then, keep it striking year after year, no matter the cost. That is the ambition that built the White City, and the ambition that helped make the fire possible. Chapter 4. Building a Dream in Months. The White City on Sand. To understand Reynolds' ambition, look at the hardest thing he demanded: time. From late 1903 to the summer of 1904, he wanted Dreamland open. A city on sand by the sea, built under salt, wind, on ground that shifts and stays damp, where storms and tides can change a coastline overnight. Reynolds gathered capital, formed a company, acquired land along Surf Avenue near the Atlantic. He did not build a few rides. He built infrastructure, pipes, wiring, gas lines, walkways, water features. He hired large crews that worked in shifts. Day work, night work, work in wind, work in rain. It was a construction site driven by impatience. His goal was simple and impossible. Dreamland had to look beautiful. Not natural beauty, a grand beauty. A white city style inspired by world fairs, with pale facades, domes, wide promenades, and water to mirror light. He wanted visitors to feel they were stepping into a cleaner, brighter, more civilized world than their daily streets. A promise that said, "You deserve to see this." At the center stood a tall landmark called the Beacon Tower. Promotions described it as rising hundreds of feet. A tower with an elevator, an observation deck, and outlines of electric bulbs that turned it into a spear of light against the sky. The point was visibility. If people could see Dreamland from far away, they would come. If they came, the gate would pay back the investment. Reynolds also pursued fire protection as people understood it at the time. Water storage, watchmen, and systems meant to respond. But the deeper truth remained. Much of the architecture depended on wood framing beneath plaster and paint. Dreamland looked like stone and marble. Inside, it was stagecraft. He also needed showmen. He worked with managers who understood crowds and promotion. They understood that a park is not only rides, it is stories. To keep attention, you need attractions that people talk about. This is how Dreamland became a place of contradictions, refinement and spectacle, beauty and shock. A tiny town of little people, animal displays, even an incubator exhibit for premature babies, where medical care sat beside entertainment because that was how it could be funded. When Dreamland opened, it became a machine of emotion. It made people believe modern life was not only in Manhattan, it was blazing on the Brooklyn shore. And because people needed that belief, they came. But building fast has a cost. Fast favors completion over durability. Whatever is not prioritized becomes a weakness. The white plaster that looks solid can hide the wood that burns. The glowing tower that sells tickets also demands immense electrical complexity, and complexity creates more points of failure. Behind the dream were thousands of anonymous workers. Many were immigrants. They mixed plaster, painted facades, installed bulbs, laid pipes, hauled lumber. They built an illusion they did not get to live inside. When Dreamland burned, it was not only Reynolds' dream that burned. It was their labor, their wages, their seasonal stability. A dream city can be raised quickly, but the speed remains inside the structure like a hidden crack, waiting for heat to find it. Dreamland was inspired by an aesthetic Americans already loved. World fairs had taught visitors to associate pale facades, grand plazas, and illuminated water with progress. You could walk through a fair and feel that the future was organized and bright. Reynolds wanted to sell that feeling at the price of an evening ticket. But a fair is temporary by design. It is built to last a season, not a century. Many fair buildings were also wood under plaster, created for speed and appearance. Dreamland borrowed that language of temporary splendor and planted it on a shoreline where salt, air, and weather constantly attacked structures. So even in normal conditions, the park needed constant repair. Paint peeled, plaster cracked, wood swelled and shrank. Electrical fixtures corroded. The dream had to be rebuilt every week to remain believable. This is why the park was never fully finished. Even after opening, construction and improvement continued. New attractions appeared. Old ones were modified. A park that stopped changing would feel old, and old meant lost crowds. So the maintenance cycle was endless, and the endless cycle created endless opportunities for a small error to become a large event. The density also served a purpose. Visitors want variety without long walks. A family might have only a few hours. So managers packed spectacles close, letting a person move from ride to show to food stand in minutes. The same design that made visitors happy made fire dangerous. One roof ignites, and heat immediately reaches the next structure. One decorative void catches, and flame can race behind a facade faster than a person can run. Dreamland was a beautiful trap built from convenience. Chapter 5. 1,000,000 bulbs. Selling modern miracle by the ticket. Today we flip a switch and light appears. In the early 20th century, electric light still felt like a miracle. Dreamland understood that and turned it into a brand. Many visitors approached the shore and saw not a dark beach, but a skyline blazing with outlines of bulbs. Light traced domes, arches, bridges, signs. Water mirrored the glow, so the park looked doubled. Night was redrawn by electricity. Promotions claimed astonishing numbers of lamps, sometimes described as 1,000,000. Whether the exact count matched, the claim mattered less than the experience. People felt surrounded by brightness. They felt that darkness had been defeated on purpose. Dreamland wanted to appear elegant. It had lagoons, canals, restaurants, dance halls. It tried to look like a fair city rather than a rough carnival. But the crowds of Coney Island were working people. They labored all week, and on weekends they wanted compensation. They wanted to scream, laugh, forget. So Dreamland, even with its refined image, still needed thrills and curiosities, the kind of attractions that made people talk. This is the plain truth. Dreamland sold controlled disaster, simulated danger. You could ride through a story of catastrophe and feel safe because the exit existed. Hellgate was a fake underworld meant to end in laughter. A city of light was meant to feel secure. Then, on the night of 1911, disaster stopped being staged. Light does more than help people see. Light makes people trust. It tells the visitor that someone is in control, that the environment is organized, that the path is safe. Dreamland sold that trust. But miracles have bills. Electricity costs money. Maintenance costs money. Every failed bulb must be replaced. Every corroded wire must be checked. Salt air eats metal. Crowds wear boards. If revenue falls, pressure rises, and pressure pushes managers to cut corners where visitors cannot see. This is an ancient lesson of spectacle. The brighter the promise, the heavier the hidden upkeep. A small park might lose a corner and survive. A park built like a city can burn like a city. Going to Dreamland was also a social ritual. People dressed better than usual. They came in groups. They bought postcards and photographs. They wanted proof they had touched modern wonder. A successful park did not only sell rides, it sold status. It made visitors feel they belonged to the future for a night. But a brand built on being the brightest becomes trapped by its own vow. You cannot easily dim the lights to save money. You cannot stop refreshing paint when your promise is beauty. You must keep running. And in constant running, the hidden systems, wiring, tar, repairs at night, become more likely to fail. Dreamland burned, and the 1,000,000 bulbs became shards. The miracle became an ember. Electric light did not only decorate Dreamland, it rewired how people felt at night. In many parts of New York, streets were still unevenly lit. Some blocks glowed, others stayed dim. Night could still feel uncertain. At Coney Island, owners used light to create certainty, a promise that the night was safe because it was visible. That promise pulled families and tourists who might otherwise hesitate. Light also created a new kind of crowd behavior. People stayed later. They wandered longer. They spent more. A bright facade is an invitation, and a dark facade is a warning. So managers treated failed bulbs as a serious business problem. That meant electricians constantly moving behind walls, climbing structures, replacing lamps, splicing wires, testing circuits. The show required invisible labor, and invisible labor is often where risk hides. When visitors see a skyline of glowing bulbs, they rarely imagine the ladders, the wiring, the temporary repairs, and the quick fixes done to keep everything shining. The public sees the promise. Workers see the strain. Dreamland had to remain perfect even as salt air degraded it. Perfection under decay requires speed, and speed creates vulnerability. There is another layer too. Coney Island was a place where young people could experience freedom in crowds. In a dense city, privacy is rare. At the shore, anonymity in a crowd created a new social space. Couples could hold hands without being watched by neighbors. Friends could laugh loudly without shame. The parks did not just sell rides. They sold permission. Permission to feel openly. Permission to break routine. That is why people forgave risk. When your daily life feels narrow, you will accept danger for a few hours of release. Dreamland offered release in the language of light. The fire showed the hidden price of that language. Chapter 6. Liliputia. A tiny town and 300 lives under stairs. Along one walkway stood a place that made visitors slow down as if pulled by the sleeve. A miniature village styled like an old European town, but everything scaled smaller. Small houses, small doors, small streets. It looked like a giant model made just large enough for real people to enter. This attraction was called Lilliputian, often advertised in newspapers in terms that modern ears find harsh. Around 300 little people lived and worked there during the season. Visitors paid to walk through and watch routines and staged civic life. From one angle, it was exploitation. Crowds treated human difference as a product. Stairs can strip dignity the way fire strips paint. From another angle, the village offered wages, community, and a rare environment where the world fit the body. Outside, many everyday objects were too large, and prejudice was heavy. Inside, for a season, scale changed. History does not allow a clean verdict. The same space can be paycheck and cage, home and stage, refuge and exhibition. On the night Dreamland burned, Lilliputian stopped being a show and became an escape route. When alarms sounded, some residents first thought it was part of the usual performance, because the village included staged fire drills for visitors. But smoke has a smell that theater cannot imitate. They ran out into the wider park and watched roofs catch and facades glow and then blacken. Many survived. Yet losing a temporary home can still feel like losing a country. A place that finally fit can vanish in minutes. This chapter matters because it reminds us that Dreamland was not empty when visitors left. People lived inside its attractions. They slept in seasonal quarters. They depended on the park's routine for stability. When the park burned, the loss was not only architectural, it was social, it was personal, and while Lilliputian ran, another space contained lives even more fragile. Behind glass, in warm incubators, premature babies depended on adults who would have to choose speed over fear. If you listen closely, Lilliputian also reveals how entertainment and labor overlapped. Visitors treated the village as a cute spectacle. For residents, it was work with a schedule and rules. They performed routines. They answered questions. They managed crowds that wanted to get too close. They lived in a space that was both community and workplace. In the wider culture of the time, people with visible differences were often pushed into public exhibition because other employment was denied to them. That is the uncomfortable truth behind many sideshow industries. At the same time, some performers built strong networks, friendships, marriages, and professional pride inside those spaces. They developed skills and identities beyond the public's gaze. So when we talk about exploitation, we also have to talk about agency, about what people chose within the limited choices offered. The fire adds another dimension. A visitor could leave at closing time. A resident could not simply disappear into a different home, because their home was inside the attraction. So a disaster in the park was a disaster in their living space. And because many of these structures were small and tightly packed, there was little time to gather possessions. In the aftermath, surviving the night did not end the crisis. People still had to find shelter, employment, and stability in a city that was not kind to the poor. Dreamland often gets remembered as architecture and bulbs. Lilliputian reminds us to remember bodies. Who slept where? Who worked where? Who had a key and who did not? Chapter 7. The Babies in the Window. When medicine had to save itself. Near Dreamland's attractions stood an exhibit that made many visitors go quiet. Warm glass incubators, and inside them, premature infants. The operator was Martin County, a controversial figure even in his own time. Some questioned his credentials. Some criticized the idea of displaying infants in a public venue. Yet County asked a different question. If hospitals refused, if equipment was costly, if poor families could not pay, then who would save these children? At that time, newborn care for premature infants was not fully accepted or standardized in many institutions. County built a model based on warmth, cleanliness, constant nursing, and relentless routine. He did not charge parents. Instead, the exhibit charged visitors for admission, and the revenue funded staff and equipment. It is a bitter paradox. Fragile life, supported by public curiosity, but records and later accounts indicate that many infants survived under this system, and that survival mattered in an era when options were limited. Inside the exhibit, nurses did not perform. They worked. They cleaned equipment. They monitored temperatures. They fed carefully. They protected infants as best they could from infection. The room had a different rhythm from the carnival outside. One side of a door held noise and thrills. The other side held tiny breaths. When the fire began, the question was time. Smoke spreads fast. Heat rises. Glass rooms become traps. Coney, nurses, and helpers moved infants out, wrapped them, and carried them again as the fire advanced. Early newspaper reports sometimes spread confusion and error, but later accounts emphasized that the infants were rescued. In a night where a city of light fell apart, one of the most extraordinary facts is that people chose care over panic. If you want to feel the weight of that, imagine a parent who came to Dreamland not for fun, but for a chance. Now imagine that parent watching a nurse run through smoke with their child pressed to a blanket. In that moment, no argument about spectacle matters. Only the body in the arms matters. Dreamland was a theater of modernity. The incubator exhibit was modernity in its quietest form, a belief that even the smallest lives deserve effort. When flames arrived, that belief ran on human legs, and it survived the night. The incubator exhibit also shows how public opinion can fund progress. Hospitals and universities often move slowly because they are cautious, bureaucratic, or limited by prevailing beliefs. Coney operated outside that pace. By placing incubators in a place where crowds already gathered, he created a financial loop. Curiosity produced admission fees. Admission fees paid nurses. Nurses kept infants alive. The survival of infants then became evidence that incubator care worked. This loop was ethically complicated, but historically significant. Over time, the idea that premature infants could be saved became harder to deny. The public had seen it. Parents had experienced it. Newspapers had written about it. So, even if the medical establishment resisted at first, the evidence kept accumulating in the most public way possible. On the night of the fire, this system was tested by chaos. Incubators are heavy. Infants are fragile. Smoke can kill faster than flame. Rescue required calm hands in a panicked environment. It required coordination, not hero poses. A nurse moving quickly while protecting an infant is a different kind of courage than a man shouting in a crowd. It is quiet courage, the kind history often overlooks. If you want to feel the texture of the scene, imagine blankets soaked with seawater to keep smoke away. Imagine carrying an infant while listening to the roar of fire outside. Imagine not knowing whether the next corridor is still open. This is the human heartbeat inside the larger spectacle. Chapter 8. The One-Armed Lion Tamer and the Black Prince. Dreamland included animal displays and performances. Because living danger sells, a lion behind bars allows the visitor to feel brave without being at risk. It lets a city feel powerful over the wild. One famous handler associated with this world was Captain Jack Bonavita, known for working with big cats even after losing an arm in an earlier attack. His story fit the era of showmanship, a man marked by danger returning to face it again. Courage as advertisement. But fire does not respect advertisements. As flames neared the animal enclosures, handlers faced choices with no clean exit. Leaving animals meant death. Releasing them could endanger streets and families nearby. In smoke and heat, even reaching cages could be impossible. Many animals died. Some accounts describe animals being shot to prevent escape, and one animal became infamous. A young lion with a dark mane named Black Prince escaped into the streets during the fire. Reports describe the lion moving through Brooklyn before police shot it to protect the neighborhood. In some retellings, people emphasize that its mane appeared to be burning, a vivid image that turned tragedy into myth. Even if details vary by witness, the core truth remains. The boundary between staged danger and real danger broke open. This is why the image endures. A burning park is terrifying, but it is still contained. A lion in the street is a threat that spreads beyond the gate. Dreamland was built to contain thrills. In the fire, it spilled them. This chapter is not here to chase shock. It is here to reveal the hidden cost of spectacle. When everything is calm, the audience sees the polished surface. When disaster arrives, the audience sees what was always beneath: captivity, responsibility, and the price paid by creatures with no voice. Now, let us widen the lens. Because Dreamland did not burn in isolation. It burned inside a ruthless competition, where every season demanded something bigger, brighter, and more unforgettable. Animal shows at amusement parks were part of a broader culture that wanted to display the world. The United States was expanding its sense of global reach. Zoos grew in popularity. Circuses traveled with exotic creatures. Seeing a lion or an elephant made a visitor feel connected to distant places they would never visit. At an amusement park, this sensation of distance and danger was condensed into a few feet of iron bars. But iron bars create an illusion of control. They work only as long as the environment remains stable. When fire arrives, bars can become heat conductors. Cages become ovens. Animals become trapped in a space designed for audience viewing, not emergency evacuation. And in panic, animals do what humans do. They seek escape. The story of Black Prince became famous because it condensed the whole disaster into one moving image. A fantasy city burning, and from that burning city, a predator running into ordinary streets. The public had paid to experience controlled fear. Now the fear was not controlled. Police response was harsh because it was forced to be. A lion loose in a neighborhood could mean deaths within minutes. So the lion was shot. This is why the detail remains haunting. Not because it is sensational, but because it shows the moral structure of the park. The park placed living beings into cages for profit. When the park collapsed, those beings suffered first, and the neighborhood inherited the danger. Dreamland was not only a victim of fire, it was a producer of consequences. Chapter 9. The War of Amusement Parks. When dreams fought for the crowd. Between 1904 and 1911, Coney Island was a battleground of major parks. Each park built its own world, yet they stood close enough that the lights of one reflected in the water of another. Competition was not only about which rides were better, it was about who understood the crowd. Dreamland wanted to be elegant, a white city. Other parks pursued raw thrills, loud spectacle, and simple intensity. If Dreamland stayed still, it would be ignored. So Dreamland added attractions, refreshed paint, and searched for anything that would make people talk. Attention was currency. Newspapers, postcards, and word of mouth were the algorithm of the era. If people did not talk about you, you died. Competition also lived in finances. A park can look magnificent and still bleed money. Dreamland paid enormous costs for electricity, staff, maintenance, publicity, and constant renovation. A claim of 1 million bulbs is also a claim of 1 million things that can fail. When revenue dipped, pressure rose. And pressure pushes organizations toward shortcuts, especially in places the public cannot see. By the spring of 1911, Dreamland was working to present itself fresh for another season. More paint, more repairs, more promises. And then, just before the most profitable holiday period, the fire arrived. History sometimes chooses the moment of greatest hope to remind you that everything can end. This competition story is also a mirror of our own time. When an industry rewards constant novelty, it pushes every player toward the edge of capacity. Whether the product is rides or content, the rhythm is the same. Faster, bigger, louder, more, and the cost is usually paid by maintenance, by workers, and by unseen safety. Dreamland was not only a victim of a bucket of tar, it was a victim of a system that demanded relentless spectacle. Competition at Coney Island also shaped the park's architecture. Owners learned that visitors remembered silhouettes, a tower, a dome, a sign visible from the train. So, parks invested in landmarks that could be recognized instantly. Landmarks are powerful marketing, but they are also complex structures that demand more maintenance and create more risk in storms and fires. The competitive pressure also meant frequent renovations. A new season required a refreshed facade. A new attraction required new wiring. A new effect required new machinery. Each change introduces opportunities for mistakes, especially when work is rushed at night to avoid closing during peak hours. So rivalry did not only create innovation, it created fatigue and improvisation. There was a cultural rivalry too. Reformers criticized Coney Island as a place of moral looseness. Owners responded by branding, claiming respectability, emphasizing family friendliness, and building environments that looked like civic monuments. Dreamland leaned into that, presenting its white city as refined. But refinement is an image. Safety requires structure, and the fire would expose the difference. In the end, No park could permanently outshine the others, because novelty is always temporary. The crowd always wants the next thing. That hunger is what keeps an entertainment district alive. It is also what makes it unstable. Dreamland was built inside that hunger. Chapter 10. The Last Season. The night the tower fell and the lights died. Return to the fire now and watch it as a chain of irreversible moments. Flame moved across domes and painted facades and signs and cloth and wood. Heat cracked glass. Metal bent. Wood snapped and popped. In places with water, the surface trembled with reflected fire. In places with ammunition, the sound kept snapping like a storm. Firefighters fought not only flame but the park's structure. Dreamland was not one building. It was a network of stages stitched together. When one section burned, it created heat and wind that fed another. It behaved like a single organism in fever. At the same time, small stories unfolded. Nurses carried infants. Handlers faced cages. Residents of Lilliputian fled their tiny homes. Workers tried to save cash drawers, tools, costumes, papers, anything that could be grabbed before the next wall fell. But fire does not care what you love. It cares only whether something can burn. Then came the moment witnesses remembered as a symbol. The beacon tower collapsed. A tower built to declare electric confidence fell into a sea of flame. In that fall, the story of Dreamland broke. Bulbs shattered and fell like glass rain. The skyline that had been designed to look permanent revealed itself as vulnerable. As the sky lightened toward dawn, Dreamland became a skeleton. Ash, twisted framing, collapsed plaster, smoke rising in daylight. The ocean kept moving as if nothing happened, a contrast that feels cruel because nature does not pause for human loss. Loss was not only theatrical. For seasonal workers, it was immediate economic emergency. Jobs vanished with buildings. Belongings vanished with quarters. A summer routine that provided income and community vanished in hours. The fire was a spectacle for the public. For workers, it was rent, food, and survival. Dreamland did not simply close. It disappeared. Witnesses often described a strange beauty in the fire. At night, flames can look like moving architecture. A burning tower can resemble a festival. This beauty is not comforting. It is disturbing because it feels like the world is celebrating destruction. Many people later felt ashamed that part of them was mesmerized. Daylight changes that. When the sun rose, the illusion of beauty collapsed. Char, wet ash, broken beams, collapsed plaster, and the smell of burned paint replaced the glowing spectacle. Daylight turns disaster into inventory. What is gone? Who is missing? Who is unemployed? Who has nowhere to sleep? The fire also exposed how quickly a leisure economy can become a survival crisis. A park is not only rides. It is jobs, food vendors, performers, cleaners, electricians, cooks, ticket sellers. When the park disappears, an entire seasonal ecosystem disappears with it. And in a city where rent and hunger do not pause, the loss becomes personal immediately. So when we speak of the beacon tower falling, we should hear more than a crash. We should hear the collapse of thousands of small plans for the summer. A worker who expected wages. A performer who expected tips. A vendor who expected crowds. All of that fell too. Chapter 11. The morning after. When ruins became an attraction. After disaster, a second crowd arrives. The crowd that comes to witness what remains. In the days after the Dreamland fire, people traveled to Coney Island to see the ruins. Some came from sadness. Some came from curiosity. Some came because newspapers had described the blaze, the collapse, the lion, and the sound of exploding ammunition. Humans seek proof. Ruins feel like proof. People stood at the edge of Char and tried to map memory onto destruction. This was the tower. This was the lagoon. This was where we stood last summer. Photographs were taken because a photograph turns shock into something stable. Stories were repeated and sharpened until a shared narrative formed. Hellgate, the tower, the lion, the babies, the ashes. Merchants appeared too. Souvenirs were sold. Fragments of debris were offered as relics. This can look cold, but it also reveals a human impulse. When we cannot hold the full truth of an event, we try to hold a piece of it. Dreamland had always been an economy of attention. After the fire, the ruins joined that economy. Behind the scenes, arguments began. Insurance, responsibility, Value: future use of the land. Reynolds proposed plans and possibilities, including selling or repurposing the site, but the practical problem remained. Rebuilding a palace of light required enormous investment in a district where competition was fierce. Confidence had burned along with wood. Dreamland, as a unified white city, was not rebuilt. Coney Island moved on because people still needed escape. Other attractions kept operating. New entertainments rose. But Dreamland became a memory fixed to a single night, a story repeated because it held everything at once: beauty, ambition, vulnerability, and loss. In the aftermath, stories hardened into icons. Hellgate became the origin point. The Beacon Tower became the symbol of collapse. Black Prince became the image that newspapers could not resist. The incubator rescue became the proof that humanity could still appear in catastrophe. These icons help the public remember, but they can also simplify. They can hide the long list of workers who lost everything, the quiet injuries, and the months of financial struggle that followed. Disaster also creates paperwork, insurance claims, disputes over responsibility, arguments about safety standards, debates about whether the park could have been saved if water pressure had held. These debates often end without a satisfying villain, because the true cause is usually a chain of decisions, incentives, and vulnerabilities. Dreamland burned because of a spill. It also burned because it was built from fast materials under constant competitive pressure. Some parts of the site did return to activity, because the shoreline does not stay empty. Concessionaires rebuild small booths. New entertainments rise. The crowd returns because the need for escape remains. But the unified white city of Dreamland did not return. The dream, once burned, did not persuade investors a second time. And this, too, is part of the story. Some losses are permanent not because they cannot be rebuilt, but because the belief required to rebuild them has died. Chapter 12. What Dreamland Left Behind. The warning inside the beauty. Dreamland is remembered not only because it burned, but because it represented an important idea. That entertainment could be immersive, that a park could be a designed environment, a world inside a gate, built from architecture, water, light, and narrative. Later theme parks would chase similar immersion with stronger control and safer materials. In that sense, Dreamland helped show what was possible and also what was dangerous. Dreamland also teaches a sharp distinction. Feeling safe is not being safe. Brightness can create trust even when the structure underneath is fragile. A unified facade can hide flammable materials. A reliable system can fail when everyone demands it at once. A routine night repair can become the spark that burns down an entire city of scenery. The story forces us to look at ethics too. A park that displays human difference or keeps wild animals carries responsibilities beyond ticket sales. In the fire, those responsibilities became visible. People fled. Workers lost wages. Animals suffered. Infants depended on nurses willing to run through smoke. The rescue of the incubator babies shows that care can exist inside a commercial world. The lion escape shows how quickly captivity becomes crisis when systems fail. Return to the beginning. The flickering bulbs. The darkness. The bucket of hot tar. The first flame. The spreading front. The falling tower. Black Prince in the street. In that sequence, you can see the whole meaning. Dreamland was built to persuade ordinary people that modern life could be bright and gentle. One night proved modern life can be bright and still be fragile. That is why Dreamland still holds us. Because the hunger for wonder has not disappeared. And the responsibility that wonder demands has not disappeared either. Dreamland also sits in the longer history of safety in public entertainment. Fires in theaters, factories, and crowded venues across the early 20th century contributed to new safety practices and regulations. The lesson was learned repeatedly, often through tragedy. Dense crowds require clear exits. Wiring requires standards. Fire-resistant materials matter. Training and drills matter. Dreamland was one event among many that pushed the culture toward those conclusions. Yet the emotional lesson may be even stronger. We are easily persuaded by surfaces. A white facade suggests purity. A bright skyline suggests control. A polished environment suggests responsibility. But surfaces can lie. The deeper structure determines what happens when stress arrives. A city of light can still be a city of tinder. That is why this story still feels modern. We continue to build spectacles, physical and digital. We continue to compete for attention. We continue to trust systems we do not fully understand. And we continue to assume that because something looks impressive, it must also be safe. Dreamland reminds us to separate appearance from engineering and excitement from responsibility. If wonder is the product, then discipline must be part of the design. Otherwise, the brightest place becomes the quickest place to burn. Closing. Dreamland burned before sunrise, but the reasons it was built still live inside us. We still build places and experiences meant to overwhelm the senses. We still measure success by crowds and headlines. We still rely on systems we rarely test under stress. So the question that survives the ash is simple. When we build our own cities of light, do we also build the discipline that keeps them from burning?